I'm not going to say it, but I'm an uncle somewhere out there, and Evan would say that if he were out in the audience. How do we, how are we supposed to, have there been studies, that document the extent to which the media is able to drive public opinion in this area specifically? And anybody can answer this.
Well, the good news is not that many people read the New York Times. With how many 100 million Americans, and I don't know, their circulation is less than 1 million, I think. The young people don't read the newspapers. That's demonstrable. None of my 30-year-olds do, and none of their friends do either. Policymakers in Washington like to see their names in the Times, as do politicians, and the Washington Post. At one time, Los Angeles Times was quoted. Now I never see them quoted. They sort of, I don't think I've seen anybody cite a Los Angeles Times article. So we're kind of a two-paper country now. The New York Times and the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal would be the third one. But they went off on a rampage yesterday against Ron Binns, the FERC chairman, but totally uncalled for. Took some very benign quotes that he had. You'd think the guy was the devil incarnate. I know I'm a long-time Republican, Ron's not, but he's a very fine fellow, make a good FERC chairman. So I'm not sure one would like to see fairer coverage, and sometimes the editorial page gets mixed up on the news page, and maybe we sometimes ought to point that out to them. That news is news and editorial is editorial.
Having had firsthand experience with the New York Times and its coverage of shale gas, some of you know what I'm talking about with regard to the issue of EIA's estimates 2 years ago. I would point out, Ben, that I think you are kind of reflecting your age here. I don't think very many people pay much attention to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or the LA Times anymore. And I would say that, I taught an energy policy class 5-6 years ago, and there was already a real abundance of alternate sources on energy information. No, just on the web and elsewhere. And today, I think it is absolutely astounding. EIA has done a lot to put out really good, bites of information that'll roll up something in a really succinct way. But if you look on the internet, it is just astounding the number of resources, universities, all sorts of places. And I do think that people are a lot better informed about the technologies. I think one of the things people still do not understand are energy markets and what it takes to bring technologies to the market. And when I mentioned at the beginning that I was with some colleagues in California talking to people, it was in the midstream petroleum refining and marketing part of the business. You wouldn't believe the number of people who contact EIA and say, who's responsible for making sure we have enough gasoline in this particular area at a point in time? And I think the experience that Ethan described of having to deal with a large public utility, and there are reasons why there's a history of publicly owned utilities in Alaska versus other places. And then the other part of the energy system, which is really a commodity system, it's a market, truly a competitive market, is not well understood, and I think that results in a lot of the confusion.
Okay. I'm going to, just 1 second here, it won't take long. I'm going to put on my hat as president-elect just for a second. So one of my ambitions for us, this organization, for the next year is to be a little more media savvy. And that means trying to get some of our people into contact with the media a little more than we have in the past. And I've spoken to our incoming vice president about this, our vice president for communication, and given her some sort of leeway to start experimenting a little bit and see what can be accomplished. Luckily, she is a great deal younger than Ben or me, and therefore will be somewhat savvy about social media and things like that. At least I hope so. So we will see. The only thing that will caution that we all have to observe is that the association, as an association, doesn't take policy positions. Individuals certainly can, but they will have to be careful to distinguish between anything they may be advocating personally and anything that the association which the association could not and would not.
Actually, our comment just on that is a nominating committee. I mean, one reason we chose someone young was we had the same idea in mind. I was going to pick up on two of the elements of the anecdotes, I guess. One of them was, I was struck by the comment about the sale of appliances being separated off from the regulated part of the electric utilities on the one hand, and then the story about the difficulties of getting the wind farm going. And sort of make a comment that, you know, and then one thing I also heard, I wrote down from Berko, was this trust in regulation. And so I wanted to sort of comment on, you know, that part of the movement in our reform of electric utility sector has been to sort of separate off the competitive or the tolerably competitive parts, you know, because we don't trust so much in regulation. And part of the problem is, so if you can run those parts, like the appliances or whatever, as a competitive part or tolerably competitive, we might think that we'll get a better outcome rather than trusting in regulation. And certainly I think, you know, something like the story we heard here, and there's a problem of, you know, the government's a big elephant in the room, and the problem of consorting with elephants is you're liable to get squashed.
Yeah, the comment on the appliances was actually the state law in the state of Wisconsin, written in 1920. At the time, gas utilities were inventing things to use gas. Because remember, the gas industry was a lighting industry. It wasn't, gas lighting was why you bought gas, because it was, whale oil was very expensive, kerosene was smelly. So the gas industry was a lighting industry. Then when the electric light bulb come in, they repositioned themselves as heating and cooking. And so they had to introduce these new appliances to the public to know what to do with the natural gas. And so many utilities had stores all around the United States, but the legislators and the regulators were very, very confident to understand that, hey, that's a competitive, selling appliances can be a competitive business, so your profits and losses from that shouldn't be in the regulated stream. And I think so it was a wise decision and well done. As a young electric company employee at Wisconsin Electric in 1972, I could go down to the company store and get interest-free loan to buy my mother a refrigerator and all the nice stuff that a good son should do for their mom, right? So, so they still had some stores, and then they got away from it. But when it was the notion that the electric service, the gas service stops at the meter, then what the customer wants to do with it is something else. Later, as a state commissioner, I voted on programs to have the utility go on the customer side of the meter after the first oil shock to do weatherization, to do energy efficiency programs with regulated funds. So even though I thought it was a good idea that utilities should stay on their own side of the meter, I later thought it was probably a good idea that we do some policy to get them on the other side. I don't know if I was right or wrong then, but we have this tendency, it's one of the issues here, the issue of subsidy, was what do you want to do, you know, if you're a regulator, what do you want to do with this utility? Do you want to make them the vehicle for energy efficiency? Well, they have all the capital in many communities, they're the largest business interest. They have access to capital. That's a tough decision. Like, how does that get to central planning? Like, we'll have the utility do smart meters. We'll have the utility do energy efficiency. We'll have the utility do distributed generation. Why not? They own the central station. Why shouldn't they own the distributed generation? And of course, the first thing that happens, and you get the real private, independent, market-oriented company saying, wait a minute, the utility has an unfair advantage, it has a brand name, it has customer contact, loyalty, and then you have the regulator being the referee into how much competition you want to have.